Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Giridharadhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Giridharadhari Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Jamunatira Vanachari Jamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Giridharadhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Giridharadhari Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Jamunatira Vanachari Jamunatira Vanachari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Jaya Kodanitai Jaya Mayapur Sachi Jaya Kodanitai Jaya Mayapur Sachi Prabhupada Prabhupada, Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Shri Shikhodnitai Nai Pusha Shiki, Shri Tulsinath Maharaj Ki Jai, Shri Giridhar Lal Ki Jai, Shri Nrsimhadev Bhagavan Ki Jai, Shri Prabhupada Ki Jai, Granthra Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Reading from Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita, the final lesson. After discussing back and forth, the devotees finally decided that early the next morning they would take Srila Prabhupada in a bullock cart to Govardhan. The majority of devotees then left Srila Prabhupada alone for that night. Later that night, Srila Prabhupada received a visit from Nishkinchana Krishnadas Babaji, who sat with Prabhupada chanting and sometimes speaking in Bengali. Suddenly, Tamal Krishna and Bhavananda came to Prabhupada's bedside. They were in tears and beside themselves with anxiety. Prabhupada understood. You request me not to go, he asked. Well, Srila Prabhupada said, Tamal Krishna, I'll tell you, I'm getting so upset sitting in the room upstairs. I was walking around. Two of the devotees told me that this road is so bad that if you go on this road, you're going to be jolted back and forth. The road is terrible. I just can't understand, Srila Prabhupada, why it has to be tomorrow that we have to go. If anybody that wants you to travel, I do. But why do we have to go when you're in this condition? I can't understand it. Why are we throwing everything out the window that we must go tomorrow? I can't understand. All right, said Srila Prabhupada softly, immediately agreeing to their proposal that he not go. Jai Srila Prabhupada, said Bhakti Charu, who was also present. Thank you, Srila Prabhupada, said Bhavananda with great relief. All right, you're satisfied? Now I am, Srila Prabhupada, said Bhavananda. Yes, I was in too much anxiety. Never mind, I shall not put you in anxiety. Actually, Srila Prabhupada, said Tamal Krishna, we're so much attached to you that you practically drive us to madness sometimes. Tonight we were becoming mad. No, I shall not do that, said Prabhupada. Babaji Maharaj, Krishna turned to Nishkinchana Krishnadas Babaji and said, just see how much affection they have for me. Srila Prabhupada, said Tamal Krishna, the way you deal with us simply deepens our attachment every moment. It is my duty, said Prabhupada, and the devotees laughed warmly, understanding. Yes, they could understand. That was his duty. By all his actions and dealings, Prabhupada's intention was to capture spirit souls and deliver them to Krishna. His method was loving service, but he did not do it for himself. He was delivering them to Krishna. That was his duty. Srila Prabhupada ki. Amen. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 6, Chapter 1, Text 11, chapter entitled The History of the Life of Ajamil. Shri Badaraya Niruvacha Karmana Karma Nirharo Karmana Karma Nirharo na hi atyantika ishyate nahyan nayatyantika ishyate avidvad adhikaritvat avidvad adhikaritvat prayashchitam vimarshanam prayashchitam vimarshanam Shri Badarayaniruvacha Karmana Karmanirharo Nayatyantika Ishyate Avidvadadikaritvat Prayashchitam Vimarshanam Shri Badarayaniruvacha Karmana Karmanirharo Nayatyantika Ishyate Avidvadadikaritvat Prayashchitam Vimarshanam Shri Badarayaniruvacha Karmana Karmaniharo Nayatyantika Ishyate Avidvadadikaritvat Prayashchitam Vimarshanam
Sri Badarayana Uvacha Kamana Kamaniya Haro Nahiyatantika Ishite Advit Adhikar Kitvam Prayashchitam Vimarshanam
Shri Badarayani Uvacha Karmana Karmanirharo Karmana Karmanirharo Nahiyatyantika Ishyate Avidvadadikaritvat Prayashchitam Vimarshanam
Master Trees.
Sri Badarayani Vacha Kamana Karmanirharo Nayatyantika Ishyate Avidvadadikaritvat Prayashchitam Vimarshanam
Shri Badarayaniruvacha Shukadev Goswami, the son of Vyasadeva, replied, Karmana, by fruit of activities, Karmanihara, counteraction of fruit activities, Na, not, He, indeed, Atyantika, final, Ishyate, becomes possible, Avidvat Adhikaritvat, from being without knowledge, Prayashchitam, real atonement, Vimarshanam, full knowledge of Vedanta. Translation. Shukadeva Goswami, the son of Vedavyas, answered, "My dear king, since acts meant to neutralize impious actions are also fruitive, they will not release one from the tendency to act fruitively. Persons who subject themselves to the rules and regulations of atonement are not at all intelligent. Indeed, they are in the mode of darkness. Unless one is freed from the mode of ignorance, trying to counteract one action through another is useless, because this will not uproot one's desires. Thus, even though one may superficially seem pious, he will undoubtedly be prone to act impiously. Therefore, real atonement is enlightenment in perfect knowledge, Vedanta, by which one understands the supreme absolute truth." Please repeat. Shukadeva Goswami, the son of Vedavyas, answered, "My dear king, since acts meant to neutralize impious actions are also fruitive, they will not release one from the tendency to act fruitively. Persons who subject themselves to the rules and regulations of atonement are not at all intelligent. Indeed, they are in the mode of darkness. Unless one is freed from the mode of ignorance, trying to counteract one action through another is useless, because this will not uproot one's desires. Thus, even though one may superficially seem pious, he will undoubtedly be prone to act impiously. Therefore, real atonement is enlightenment in perfect knowledge, Vedanta, by which one understands the supreme absolute truth. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki. The Guru, Shukadeva Goswami, has examined Parikshit Maharaj, and it appears that the king has passed one phase of the examination by rejecting the process of atonement because it involves fruitive activities. Now Shukadeva is suggesting the platform of speculative knowledge. Progressing from Karma Kanda to Jnana Kanda, he is proposing Prayashchitam Vimarshanam. Real atonement is full knowledge. Vimarshana refers to the cultivation of speculative knowledge. In Bhagavad Gita, karmis who are lacking in knowledge are compared to asas. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita 7:15, Namam duskrityano muda prapadyante naradama mayaya paritagyana asuram bhavam ashrita. Those miscreants who are grossly foolish, the lowest among mankind, whose knowledge is stolen by illusion, and who partake of the atheistic nature of demons, do not surrender unto me. Thus, karmis who engage in sinful acts and who do not know the true objective of life are called mudas, asas. Vimarshana, however, is also explained in Bhagavad Gita 15:15, where Krishna says, Vedaishcha savaya hameva vedya. The purpose of Vedic study is to understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead. If one studies Vedanta but merely advances somewhat in speculative knowledge and does not understand the Supreme Lord, one remains the same mudha. As stated in Bhagavad Gita 7:19, one attains real knowledge when he understands Krishna and surrenders unto him. Bahunam janmanam ante jnanavam mam prapadyate. To become learned and free from material contamination, therefore, one should try to understand Krishna, for thus one is immediately liberated from all pious and impious activities and their reactions. Om Jnanatimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshuramritam Dena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupakadamayam Dadati Swapatantikam Vandeham Shiguro Shritabadakamalam Shigurun Vaishnavam Shah Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raganatam Vitam Dam Sajivam Sarvaitam Savadutam Durijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shivashakan Vitam Shah He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagapate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sutadevi Pranamami Hari Priye Panchakalpatarubhyascha Kripasundavayevacha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So, can I have a tissue, please? Srila Prabhupada in this commentary to Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, verse 7, where Arjuna is expressing his confusion over the right course of action. Karpanya dosho pahata svapala. Then in the purport to that verse, Srila Prabhupada says, by nature's own arrangement, the complete activity, all material activities are a source of perplexity. So and therefore one should approach a spiritual master who can teach one the proper goal of life. So this progress from Karma Kanda to Jnana Kanda, and this is really the beginning of that stage of approaching a spiritual master due to frustration. Material life is a suffering condition. For one who's accepted a material body and who identifies with the material body, there's constant suffering because the nature of the body is that it's very sensitive to changes, and the mind also is constantly making us aware of those changes. So, and generally, most of those changes involve some kind of pain. So, in the beginning, the Karma Kanda rules and regulations are given with the incentive that this can bring about regulated enjoyment, peace of mind, steady relationships, like good material, artha, karma, dharma, like peaceful life without where one's material pains and frustrations are to some degree mitigated. So that is the promise that's given from in the Shastra and from the Brahmins for performing the karma kanda activities. And there's some evidence there, that even persons who are grossly materialistic can see that persons who follow karma kanda activities strictly do become more peaceful, and that societies that follow that strict system of law and order, then they're generally more peaceful societies where at least people are, can understand, at least if there's still birth, death, old age, and disease, but it's very clear, it's very clearly delineated when what suffering is, how the suffering will come, and how it can be mitigated by certain social interactions which are given by the Brahmins and by the Shastras. And then the Kshatriyas are there to protect society from excessive attacks of one kind or another. So it brings about a kind of sense of security. But it's not easy to follow. And actually it's impossible to follow exactly, because when all living entities who come into the material world, then they all have a desire to be the enjoyer. And therefore, when there's a great deal of suffering, then they take up these strict rules and regulations, just like when there's, like we hear from when Maharaj Anga retired from being a king because he was like so frustrated by his son's activities. Then when Maharaj Anga gave up the jurisdiction of the kingdom, then there was due to the lack of a strong Kshatriya, then many rogues became prominent. And therefore, even though Maharaj Vena was a very, very cruel king, people were at least satisfied that someone was bringing law and order into place. So that acknowledgement that in one sense human beings by nature are selfish and therefore there needs to be law and order. So that's there in the acceptance of karma kanda. But even with that acceptance, the lower nature still comes out, and therefore people break the rules and regulations, and therefore they become more entangled in the reactions to those rules and regulations. So one who has actually seen that either in their own life or in the life of their family or in the life of the country or the nation, or in whatever way they see that process, then they become disgusted with the whole process of like structured society, and they also become hopeless at the idea that it can ever really be adjusted correctly. They become very frustrated. So this is, in one sense, this Srila Prabhupada says this is like the beginning of human life. Tato Brahma Jigyasa. Now we have got the human form of life. Let's use our intelligence at least to see that life is a suffering condition, not just because I haven't quite got it right or I haven't quite adjusted it. No, life is a suffering condition because we've accepted a material body, and because we have desires which are uncontrollable by any material means, or are unfulfillable by any material means. So the Jnani, he understands that as long as there's a desire to enjoy the material energy, then that will propel us towards transgressing the laws which allow for peaceful existence, and also that it ends in death anyway. So, unfortunately, throughout history, both Vedic and Western history, even though many leaders and philosophers and Brahmins have come to this conclusion and have tried to deliver it through literature, through their own actions, through administrators, try to administer this understanding. But it's the nature of the world that the world is meant to bring about this frustration to impel us to go more deeply into our understanding. In this verse, Shukadev Goswami says, unless one is freed from the mode of ignorance, trying to counteract one action through another is useless, because this will not uproot one's desires. So, the reason those material desires are so strong is because the real nature of the root of our existence is our connection with the Supreme Absolute Truth, with Krishna, with the spiritual energy. And when we give up that connection, then throughout our material existence, we're forced to try to fulfill that dynamic relationship. So it's described in Lord Rishabhdev's teachings to his sons in Canto 5, Chapter 5, Text 8. Pungsastriya mituni bhavametam tiyomito hridaya granti mahu. On the basis of this misconception, which ties together the hearts of the male and female, one becomes attracted to his body, home, property, children, relatives, and wealth. In this way, one increases life solutions and thinks in terms of I and mine. So even if we're not now in a relationship where we can perceive that our heart has been tied together with that of a female or a person of the opposite sex, it's actually at some stage in our existence, then that knot has been tied. And therefore it's not possible to, and without gradually untying that knot, then it's not possible to cross beyond the material energy. It's not possible to leave the material energy behind, because it will just bring about extreme frustration if we try to perform activities that don't satisfy that connectivity, what people call love, but which is actually lust. So it's in the previous verse, Maharaj Rishabhdev says, Evam mana karma vasham prayunkte avidyayat manya padiyamane pratina yavan mi vasadevena muchitadeya yogena tavat. When the living entity is covered by the mode of ignorance, he does not understand the individual living being and the supreme living being, and his mind is subjugated to fruitive activity. So ignorance completely covers this understanding of our eternal relationship with our Supreme Lord, which is there in the seed in the heart. but we've sold our heart to material lust, and therefore instead of having that loving relationship in our heart, an active loving relationship with Vasudeva, then we've replaced that with a very intense attraction for the object of enjoyment, which is, and the material root of that is the attraction for the opposite sex. And then from that attraction expands many other attractions. Sri Rishabhadev says, until one has love for Lord Vasudeva, he is certainly not delivered from having to accept a material body again and again. So all of these other arrangements, both Vedic and all of the other, sociological, economic, psychological attempts to satisfy the self, they will fail unless they cultivate our original love for Lord Vasudeva, for Krishna. And so therefore you might say, so what's the purpose of Karma Kanda and Jnana Kanda if they don't satisfy that love? Well, the purpose of them is to bring people gradually into the association of pure devotees of Krishna, and also to prepare them for tapasya, to prepare them for renunciation of the objects of sense gratification. Just as Atoksha was quoting Mahatma Prabhu this morning in class, tapasya in one sense means to unplug the mind and to accept strict rules and regulations. So it may seem, well, Shukadev Goswami seems to be encouraging Maharaj Parikshit to reject strict rules and regulations because they don't satisfy the soul, they just lead to frustration. Parikshit and Raja they're suggesting Jnana Kanda, which is kind of more like dry renunciation. So these activities of this is the yoga ladder. So these different disciplines which are practiced on the different rungs of the yoga ladder, they're useful because they make us accustomed to the practice of renunciation, to the practice of accepting rules and regulations, so that when we actually come in contact with the pure devotee of Vasudeva, then we can actually apply the instructions that we receive. And actually, as soon as we do that, we're liberated. Because then the top of the ladder is in the spiritual world. And that ladder, which we perhaps were already climbing up, in one sense, the first rung of the ladder, well, actually, before you step on the ladder, there's just suffering. Adhyatmika, adhibhautika, adhidevika, just suffering as animal life, really. And then there's an acceptance. Oh, this is terrible. And then you may see that those people who are living less animalistically, who are living according to rules and regulations, they're more peaceful, they're more satisfied. Let me go on to the first rung of the ladder, Karma Kanda. But then, it just, after some time, because of the fruitive nature, then people just go back down again to animal life. So then, okay, let's go to the next level, Jnana Kanda, accepting the futility of looking for material enjoyment. So these processes may seem like very futile, but as soon as the top of the ladder is fixed in the spiritual world by the mercy of the acharyas and the spiritual masters who are handing down that knowledge, then all of the endeavors we make then become of value. And this is the great mercy that we've received from Srila Prabhupada, that like right from the very first rung of the ladder, we're on that spiritual ladder right from the very, very beginning. And even devotees who may not manage to stay on the first rung for their whole lifetime, they're still connected. So this is and in the next verse of in verse 9 of chapter 5, Lord Rishabh teaching us to his sons. Sorry, not verse 9. Verse 10. Then he says, "O my sons, you should accept a highly elevated Paramahamsa, a spiritually advanced spiritual master. In this way, you should place your faith and love in me, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. You should detest sense gratification and tolerate the duality of pleasure and pain, which are like the seasonal changes of summer and winter. Give up the endeavor for sense enjoyment and engage in the service of the Lord. Listen to discussions about the Supreme Personality of Godhead and always associate with devotees. Chant about and glorify the Supreme Lord and look upon everyone equally on the spiritual platform. Thus, practicing Bhakti Yoga, you will patiently and enthusiastically be elevated in knowledge and will be able to give up the false ego." So, although Srila Prabhupada sometimes said that performing tapasya makes the heart hard, and that's the case in the case of the Mayavadis especially, and those Gyanis who are particularly inclined toward a Mayavadi philosophy, particularly who are searching for liberation into the impersonal Brahman. So those persons, their austerities, their tapasya makes their hearts hard. But tapasya performed for the purpose of pleasing a highly elevated Paramahamsa who has love for Krishna, that tapasya is always nourishes the soul, and also it very much pleases Krishna. It's very pleasing to Krishna. It's pleasing to Krishna because Krishna wants to teach us the highest knowledge. Krishna actually wants to be able to reveal to us like the nature. Krishna wants us to be able to taste the love that he has for us. He wants to let us know how much he loves us. But we can't understand how much he loves us when we still have lust in the heart. Therefore, Krishna is very pleased when his aspiring devotees voluntarily undergo austerity. And Srila Prabhupada was also very pleased when his disciples voluntarily underwent some austerity to please him, because he knew that actually would prepare them for for really being able to appreciate Krishna's love. So the spiritual master, we glorify the spiritual master. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chikshurumilitam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. The spiritual master is forcing open our eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. And when we're fortunate to have we're coming in a line of spiritual masters who are forcing open our eyes, not just with the torchlight of knowledge, but also not just with the Jnananjana, but also the Premanjana, which is like the torchlight of pure love for Krishna. So right from the beginning of the first time that we receive a book, we read one of Srila Prabhupada's books, so we hear the we hear the Sankirtan, or we taste some Mahaprasadam, or we come to see the deities, right from that moment, and our eyes are being opened with the prema of the pure spiritual master. So Shukadev Goswami was undoubtedly such a pure spiritual master, and Maharaj Parikshit also had that love, pure love for Krishna, but they're engaging in this conversation for the sake of others, just as Krishna speaks with Arjuna. And there's many conversations in the Bhagavatam are between highly elevated Paramahamsas, but they're guiding us through the different processes. And it doesn't mean that because we have a highly elevated Paramahamsa spiritual master, then that these other lower processes are not relevant for us. No, they are still relevant, because as long as we're performing Vaidhi Bhakti, as long as we're not on the platform of Raganuga Bhakti, where we're spontaneously attracted to executing the activities, then we're being propelled by the force of the affection of the Supreme Lord and the affection of his devotees. They're forcing us, and they're forcing us through the rules and regulations of sadhana bhakti. And there has to be some force, because if there's no force, then it just becomes rules and regulations. And it just becomes a club, really, or it just becomes like a social club. There has to be force. We have to constantly make an endeavor, understanding that it's actually that endeavor. It's the endeavor to please Krishna by performing sadhana bhakti strictly. That's pleasing to Krishna, and therefore we receive Krishna's mercy. If there's no force, then it means we're just using the kind of comfortable facility of the temple to fuel our sense gratification. So it's nice that we've got a nice strong brahmachari ashram, and there's lots of literature about the wonders of living in a brahmachari ashram, and even if we're not in the brahmachari ashram, even in the householder ashram, there are many great examples amongst the devotees in ISKCON, and of course in Lord Chaitanya's associates, of devotees who were very, very renounced. And because they were very renounced, the Lord was very merciful to them. Actually, it's interesting, in Srila Prabhupada gives many classes on the 6th canto, chapter 1. And in one of those classes, even though he's talking about tapasya and renunciation, and he's extremely like strict about, but then all of a sudden he talks about Raghunath Das Goswami. And he says Raghunath Das Goswami is our acharya. He teaches like the highest levels of prayojana and of prema bhakti, and his writings are the most esoteric bhakti ras writings of all of our acharyas. But he says the reason he was given that mercy was because Lord Chaitanya was so pleased by his renunciation that he was extremely rich. His parents were both millionaires, and he was the only child, and they just like loved him so much. He had all servants and all facility that he could possibly want. But when he met Lord Chaitanya, he immediately became determined that he was going to get Lord Chaitanya's association, and he had to convince his parents that their attempts to try to keep him entrapped in the house were futile. So he had to prove, in one sense, he proved to them that nothing was going to keep him back from attaining the shelter of Lord Chaitanya. So similarly, we want to be in the same way. Nothing is going to prevent us from taking the mercy of Srila Prabhupada. So, this is in the brahmachari ashram is very good training for that, because it makes us accustomed to accepting voluntary austerity. Stop there. Are there any questions or comments? There's one nice, in this last verse I quoted from 5, 10 to 13. Mat Deva Sangat, by association with my devotees. Srila Prabhupada says in the purport, the word Mat Deva Sangat is very important. There are many so-called religions devoted to the worship of various demigods, but here good association means association with one who simply accepts Krishna as his worshipable deity. Mantra Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Shri Shikon Nitai Mai Pushashi ki, Nitai Gaura Premanandi. Ananta Koti